Mike Levin here, November 5th, 2022, Saturday, at around 4:40 p.m. And I thought I'd do another video, rambling probably about nothing and everything and nothing, and maybe some Linux, Python, Vim, Git, because no matter how my exploratory activities go, trying different things, I continuously come back to those for mostly professional, but also personal spiritual satisfaction reasons. It's the how do you earn a buck, hard-hitting necessity of life that may bring you there in the first place, but it's loving what you find, what you discover and internalize, that keeps you coming back for more, improving forever. Once you're bitten by the bug of Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, you'd like to give it all a hug, but never learn every bit. I covered a lot of the important stuff in the last video. The means is Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. The end, because it's a means to an end, you gotta have a project. But I hate the concept project. It's every little thing gets done. So, the real main project is enjoying the process. You don't have to be traveling, seeing the world's sights, and living in awe and wonder, and spending money all the time to enjoy the state of living. The truth is, you can enjoy, find it wonderful, enjoy the miracles of being alive anywhere you are, when you are in your life. It doesn't have to be when you're a kid and then as an adult. It's all adulting and hateful, right? Hand in hand with the concept of adulting is hateful things, with the exception of having to pay taxes and all, which, you'll be able to automate away. You won't even need to think about it. They'll both be optimizing your income and filing your taxes, so you'll be free. That's what I'm looking forward to most about the rise of machine intelligence, right? You don't even have to interact with a tax accountant. You just say, here's all my receipts, watch what I spend. I'll answer questions as you have them, and make it all just happen. I don't want to think about it and try and get as much in my bank account when it's done as you can. And that's going to be a nice era, fighting back against all the paperwork of life with the miracle of machine learning, the rise of artificial intelligence. That and keeping your house tidy. Clean my house and do my taxes. Robots, please. And I'll keep busy doing stupid data transformation tricks. I started out looking for loopholes, right? I started out in a loophole. I started out at Drexel University, enrolled in an engineering program, going for mechanical engineering to be part of the projects of putting people on the moon and Mars, all these things that might actually still happen in my lifetime. That was my passion and my goal. And because I couldn't cut it in the math and physics courses, I switched majors to graphic design. My dad was still cool with it because, it was still going to be a Drexel degree, and I'd be able to graduate in 4 years instead of 5, which he was all about, and I'd be able to do the work-study program that Drexel offers too. I'm going to work for a company during that time, a mentorship, but paid. My dad loved that too. And I commuted to college, the reverse commute into the city. Well, that's not the right. I commuted from the burbs. It's still technically living in the Philadelphia border, so I was in the city. But I commuted further into the city, driving along the East or West River Drive of the Schuylkill River, every day with my Mustang convertible, with my top down when I could, in weather much like this, autumn with the leaves, colors changing. It was a very heady time. And I was smitten with Commodore computers, because while I was going to Drexel for graphic design, I went to work for Commodore computers too on my college internship program. And I started year one. I never stopped working for Commodore because I got a job with them just after graduating high school. I was the president of the local computer user group, Philadelphia Amiga User Group. Shout out to Tony Antonuccio and Ed Gee and all the people who made that those meetings so awesome. Jerry Hedden was another one. And wow, everyone has their rosy reminiscence, their good old days. When I look back, the whirlwind of graduating high school, it was on the tail of my parents getting divorced. I decided to live with my dad while going to college. And as soon as I graduated college, my dad kicked it. He had type 2 diabetes and ate cheesesteaks all the time, right? Enough said. There's not much more that had to be read into it than that. And so he went obsolete in his time. He had to get out of the textile industry because even though, he still could have been employed into his 60s, he would have had to have moved to where the work was. It either meant moving to New York City, which I myself ended up doing. Isn't it? Funnily enough, I ended up where he resisted going because it was so much cheaper. You got more power for the dollar living in Philadelphia and working in New York City. A 1970s and 1980s Philadelphia cost of living with a 70s and 80s New York income. That differential paid for by the willingness to commute shortened my dad's lifespan and defined his lifestyle. And when the last of the textile mills went away in the United States, because he was a quality assurance engineer in the textile industry, he made sure that fabric was being built to specification. He could look at fabric and know how well the factories were doing. So most of the jobs went overseas to where the textile mills were. And he would still have the occasional job here, stateside, I guess inspecting the work that came over in the boxes, but it's not the same thing as being on the factory floors. So he also had jobs at the last of the textile mills. Somerset, I think, was one of them. He worked for all of them that were like the last holdouts of the Philadelphia textile mills. And they went away and he had to become a check casher. And then he died. And then I took over the check cashing store and had to shoot someone to defend myself. And then Commodore went out of business. And then in a spiraling, reeling, weird headspace, discovering girls really for the first time, because I was a late bloomer, even all through college commuting. I was such a geek nerd square. So after I was out of college for a little while, after I went through my dad ordeal, I went to work for a company called Commodore Computer. No, I went to work for a company called Scala Multimedia. They were a Commodore Computer software company, become kind of like a startup, a perpetual startup. They could spend decades starting up and never quite getting there. The car that never quite turned over and started going under its own power. And boy, did that do a job on me, because part of my income was a variable income component based on how much money I helped them make. And when no one would answer a sales inquiry, because sales inquiries were just starting to come in over the web in those days, I would generate about 10 sales inquiries per day for them as their eventual webmaster. First, I was something other than the webmaster, but I was there with them for more or less a 10-year run on and off, right? I stopped working for them for 2 years in the middle while I went to work for a company called Profit 21 in Bristol, PA. You know, it's about as north as you can get on Route 1 before it crosses over into New Jersey, and I-95 before it crosses over into New Jersey, north of Philadelphia. So for a while, I would drive from the Roxborough, Manayunk area out west to Commodore, and then out west to Scala, and then up north to Yardley, PA, and then back west to Scala again, right? I lived in Virginia somewhere in there for a few years. Wow, 50 years is a long time, and you accumulate a lot of experiences in 50 years, and it can start to get blurry. But I got really pissed off at Scala because I could have been making a lot more money. They could have sort of taken over the world of this digital signage multimedia, but you know, the whole collective rest of the world was going in a different direction. And you know, it was the rise of the Sound Blaster cards and the 3D graphics cards, just the beginning of NVIDIA and the Radeon ATI cards. So it was all going Doom and Quake and based around PCs, and here Scala was doing stuff based on, still on the Commodore Amiga computer, which was imminently going away. And they switched over to PCs. They created their own operating system, MMOS, and here I was learning all this proprietary stuff again. These Windows platforms that were going away, Windows 3.1, with these proprietary Scala platforms of Scala scripts that were never going to remain much in their original form or significant in the workforce. That's the most important thing, right? Proprietary isn't always great, because unless you go to work for someone else using that exact same proprietary software, you're not bringing your skills with you. They're not your own skills. They're just added proprietary software skills. You get keyed and coded to only have value in this world as you exist as a component of some larger commercial enterprise. That's how Microsoft wants you. That's how Oracle wants you. That's how most companies who, you know, are trying to get you paying a monthly subscription to use and be on their stuff. That's their business plan. They need to keep you dependent. And the best way to keep you dependent on them is by you not knowing anything else. Not knowing anything else. Can you imagine that? There came a time in my career where I could not imagine that, and it was painful to have secret weapons like the Amiga computer that let me work such magic. That and Deluxe Paint and AREX, process automation, inter-process communication, that you could just work such great automation, but it was on the Amiga computer. In the early 90s, before the rise of the web, and you could feel something special percolating. If this was possible, surely the whole world would be falling in love with and doing this sort of thing in the very near future. But instead of being on the Amiga computer with all its built-in wonderful graphics and animation and multimedia, it really split in two directions. The web and the web browser as the sort of ubiquitous computing device direction, and it's flat 2D land. Most stuff in the browser really remained 2D and PostScript in nature almost, up until 3D cards became, or 3D graphics cards had interchangeable APIs and were built into everything. We're at about that point now, but the HTML browser world was one flat world. And the other branch was, of course, the 3D cards, things built for those particular graphics accelerators. And that gave you your 3D games, your first-person shooters, your Dooms leading to Quakes, leading to whatever the kids are doing today that is massive multi-user. First-person shooter, nonetheless. Just you're playing with other people, and you can coordinate your actions and talk to each other and plan ahead and put it on as a show for people to watch you, because it's also a form of entertainment. Boy, it takes all kinds. 8 billion people is a lot of people on this planet. That's a lot of people finding a way to occupy their time every day. Can you imagine that? 8 billion people finding a way to fill, what is it, 24 hours minus 6 or 8 hours sleep every night, fill 16 or 18 hours every day. You're not actively filling it. Your mind isn't like busy and noisy all that time. Enter meditation and altered states of consciousness. And just going on automatic, getting into the flow. Entering the flow, being in the zone. It's a good place to be. Time passes faster. You alter your perspective for a little while, as if not a human being in your lot in life, in that big old meta state that humans like to go into, right? We can think about thinking, and then we can get caught in these really awful thought eddies. Thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking. Introduce any negative thought, and it's a downward spiral, right? All thoughts lead to triggering. All being triggered leads to hours of inability, verklemtness, paralysis, existential crisis, the real pandemic of our era, right? We can always fight the nasty bugs of the physical world. It's a little bit harder to fight the funk of existentialism and worse still, nihilism. It's too easy to come to the conclusion that nothing really matters. I believe that I made an argument in my last video, if non-locality, then everything might matter. You don't know. You don't know what's the center of the universe and what's not. Every argument against the anthropomorphic principle is flawed. The only argument we have by first-hand experience is that many of the things about our state of existence should be taken into heavy account because it works. What produced life in our case is capable of producing life, and therefore must be examined, particularly closely in all places where the same combination of events may occur. Goldilocks zone, tidal locked moon, all that stuff culminates together to give you, a tectonically active planet with water sharing the surface and lots of geological activity. Tectonically active. Life's going to happen. You're going to get at least the slime mold, right? Universe looks like slime mold. Most first forms of life are going to look like slime mold. Those rules that govern slime mold emerge from out of the physical world more easily than higher forms of life. First, you get lower forms of life. Some of those low forms of life are things that can replicate and grow. Slime mold, DNA or not, it doesn't matter. You get the slime mold pattern in the web of the universe itself, the honeycomb-esque pattern of which the whole observable universe seems to be comprised is slime mold in form. So, we can expect to find that kind of a life form on the surface of Goldilocks zone, tidally locked planets all over the place. The key questions after that are, how will that life draw energy? What's it going to draw it from? Methane gas or sunlight? Is it going to be chlorophyll and plant-like in nature, or mitochondria, chemical burning in nature? It could go different ways. Is it going to be purple chlorophyll or green chlorophyll? It won't be chlorophyll if it's purple, but some other thing that serves a similar purpose, capturing higher energy waveforms, or wavelengths. But since being around for a while, more subject to some sort of extinction event and things nipping at their heel that can survive in environments with differently resourced environments, right? When an environment is suddenly differently resourced, your purple plants might go away and your green plants might take their place. And, the reset button on the surface of a planet might be so complete that there's not even deposits of oil left over, or not even artifacts of ancient civilizations left over. The whole surface of the planet could become molten for all we know, right? Depending on the extent of what kind of collision occurs. So, we assume that there's a certain amount in Earth's history that is almost unknowable to us. There's no digging into that past. But we can dig as far into the past as the last cataclysmic event had allowed. If it were only a fairly big meteor blast, a lot of things on the surface of the Earth might have survived in some artifact form, higher concentrations of certain types of carbon or whatever it is that's speculated in the Cerulean hypothesis. Life could have been here before. And mammals are weird. Mammals are the furry things under the dinosaur toes that were around after the asteroid strike that could go underground for a while in the form of moles. And what else survived in that time? Well, alligators and turtles. And of course, things in the ocean that didn't need surface resources at all. But as far as stuff that needed surface resources, alligators, turtles, and mammals, right? A few other things. A few dinosaurs squeaked through as the birds. So that's 3 major life templates right there. 3 major life templates that work living together. And in this latest go-around, the one to achieve meta-sentience, a type of self-awareness that allows it to rapidly change the surface of the planet, to destroy itself if it wants to, How quick upon achieving some sort of, science-capable intelligence, right? Because there's all kinds of intelligences, I'm sure. There's certain, I'm sure, spiritual intelligences that could maybe lead to technological advancements, but it would be through an almost evolutionary, almost entirely epigenetic in nature, right? Controlling how you evolve. Your technology is pure self-betterment of the shape of your own being, somehow. And then there's those who lean on external technologies that figure things out, like puzzles and riddles. And by solving those puzzles and riddles, rolling super abilities, superpowers, into your tool set, as we have done clearly with computers, right? No doubt, humans are capable of far more than they could before because of both atomics and computers, both because, we achieved the ability to destroy ourselves, yet didn't. The pessimists are wrong, right? If things were as bleak as pessimists try to make out and bring everyone down to their, ulcer-inducing, miserable state, their argument goes that eventually we will all be in the gutter. And the argument on the side of on the side of the optimists is, so far so good. We've been through some interesting filter events, haven't we? And we've survived. Yeah, but barely. Yeah, but we've survived. Yeah, but this. Yeah, but here we are. Here you are beating all the odds. Can you imagine the odds of your own existence? Imagine for a moment the odds of your own existence. That person slowed down to a crawl there in the middle of the highway. Imagine the odds of your survival, of making it through each day. Imagine the odds of your perpetuating ideas, gene lineage, whatever, right? Because over my prior videos, I've started laying down the concepts that things that get passed on generationally that are not DNA also count. It also matters, both in your own body, because not everything is defined by your genes. A lot of it is gene expression. I guess the capacity is defined by your genes. Your genes say that you have a diversity of body shapes within this range of possible, probability. And the circumstances of your birth and your life make certain genes express. Thus, some people live to 100 and some people to 30, So, we must take care of what genes we express. If you don't think this is tied to your mental state, then I don't know where your intuitive abilities, if they exist, are coming from. Your intuition should be able to tell you that when you're stressed all the time, you experience things such as hypertension. And this couldn't be good for your heart and your body. It's not like working out. It's not like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It is needless excess wear and tear being put on your body because thought eddies that need not be eddying. You need to interrupt those thought eddies, interrupt them, and get out of the excessively meta state. And once you can get out of that downward spiral state on demand, as a mental trick, you got to trick yourself. Even if we are channeling something from places unknown, as if we are antennas, and our bodies in this material world are a radio, and we're tuning in a vibe and a spirit from places unknown, of different dimensions of time and space and being, woo, 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 woo. Even if that's the case, you're allowed to use mental tricks to tend to the state of that radio device that is not against some sort of code, unless you make it so. Let your body get enough rest. Get the sleep that you need. If through external stimulation or external influence, your the radio is not kept in good shape, change those external influences. You don't have to keep your radio in the place it's at. You can pick it up and move it someplace else. It's within your power. Looking more closely is a thing. Stop automatic filtering that your mind and body does just to get by and survive. 99% of what's going on around you is just filtered out as background white noise because you don't need it to survive. You might as well be on automatic, robot, click whirl response, click whir, click whir, click whirl. Robert Cialdini talks about that in his book Persuasion, The Art of Persuasion, Influence, something like that. But Robert Cialdini, and most humans want to be on automatic and following that click whir response most of the time because it's easiest and it lets you just get along. Get along, get along, get along. And if your source of income is included in that automatic daily movement, then you get in a really secure and static state. You do your work, you earn your money, you go, you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you do your work and earn your money, and you eat and sleep, and the pattern repeats, the pattern repeats, the pattern repeats. About 365 times a year, 364, 365, something like that. For about 100 years, if you're lucky, right? So 10 times around the sun for each finger of your hand, for each of your 10 fingers. Isn't that awesome? About 10 times around the sun for each of the 10 fingers of your hand. 10 times 10 is 100. That makes me happy. I like that. As I'm not someone who believes excessively in numerology and all that stuff. I believe in coincidences and serendipity, things being meant to be on occasion. Not that much, very rarely, but on occasion, the occasional miracle. However, on the whole, miracles are happening all around us all the time statistically. The true miracle is when they are noticed by looking closer and perchance recorded and perchance, somehow acted on to improve our world. You know who did that? Michael Faraday, a true experimentalist who noticed things about our world and said, hey, I'm just looking closer. Anyone could have noticed this, but I noticed that a needle going through a magnetic field has moments of repulsion right when most people are talking about its attraction. So when you take a compass and move it around a wire, you can see the needle move. What happens if you keep the metal still and move a wire around it? Right? Or it made a coil and moved the metal in the coil. What then? And if you just looked at things differently, you too could invent the electric motor, and 10 years later the generator. Just like every microphone is also a speaker. Every speaker is a microphone. Bet you didn't know that. Every speaker is a microphone, and every motor is a generator. You just, wire it up a little bit differently, and you can recover generated energy. Just like in a microphone, you wire it up a little differently, and you can listen to things that are being spoken at the other end of a speaker. Surprise! These are like funny jokes, and it doesn't even take that much circuitry to build this stuff. A basic crystal radio set, or a basic electric motor, are all really easy to build. You don't need much more than a wire and a magnet and a piece of metal. And, sometimes you need a thing to generate the power in the first place, so you can see the effect, right? So you put it in a waterfall or a windmill, and then you can see the electricity get generated. Batteries are also a thing. There are these little fundamental breakthroughs that had to be put together in order to have the complete set of what works to drive society forward, to make us collectively as a species, technologically growing species, and advancing, not advanced, none of this is really all that advanced, but a technologically advancing species. And there's these nuanced little splits of directions things could go. Whether you become a digital computing society or an analog computing society, once you embrace digital, how much room you have left in your open-mindedness for analog to make a return for certain portions. These are all things we're going through right now. Wow, so in our lifetimes, there's going to be at least three of the real biggies. Three of the real biggies, right? Virtually free energy. It's in our lifetimes. Next 50 years, no problem. One of these things is going to come together really well. Fusion, solar, wind, geothermal. Any one of these can open the door to essentially free energy, especially when coupled with high temperature superconducting to get the energy around, and nearly perfect batteries, again, to get the energy around. Can you imagine just on the nearly cheap energy, nearly free energy front, how far things advance? So one of the other fronts that'll be taking place along the same time is miracle materials. By being able to construct new alloys, yes, with some 3D printing and all kinds of fabrication of material technologies, we'll be able to make things that platforms to space, things like space elevators. All that will gradually be coming into the realm of reality. Even if we don't see space elevators in our lifetime, we're going to be seeing a plethora of products, a blossoming of things that were not possible in the past because miracle materials. And thing leads to thing leads to thing. Part of that miracle materials is, of course, quantum computers, because that will get us through these vacuum tube ages when everything has to be like near 0 degrees Kelvin to maintain superimposition, quantum entangled states to prevent decoherence. All these tricks that we do for quantum computing will progressively become transistor and solid state like. They won't take as much energy and space and room. And just like the transistor evolved out of the vacuum tube, some future quantum computing integrated circuit will evolve from out of today's monstrosities. First the UNIVAC and ENIACs, and then the supercomputer on your wrist. And then imagine what's possible in data centers now, just today, right? It's fabulously powerful, the density of computing power that's possible at a fair energy cost. Cooling data centers is a thing, getting rid of the excess heat energy and getting the cheap power in the first place. That's why they're put near things like, geothermals and dams and stuff where you can generate power and get electricity cheaply for computing. Computing costs power for a while. We'll gradually overcome that, not completely. They'll just become cooler computing. So, cooler quantum computing on an integrated circuit in our lifetimes. And of course, hand in hand with that is machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? Quantum artificial intelligence, right? Talk about Venn diagrams. With perfect batteries as their own power sources and the ability to generate power, right? Robots that recharge themselves from the sun with the ability to heal and repair themselves with built-in 3D printers, perchance to reproduce in a similar fashion. Sci-fi? Not if we don't kill ourselves, right? If humanity does not end itself, if we survive our filter events, machines will gradually increase in diversity of forms and diversity of learning, life being systems and attempts. Until such time as we get ones that hits all the magic things that work well together. Righteous feedback loops and acceleration effects. Some of the most common is you got to be careful what can swarm and self-replicate. When you combine things that both have swarming abilities so they can think better as a group, the number of neurons increases. The ability to recognize patterns improves as more get together, and you can heal yourself and replace parts and build more. Gray goo comes in a lot of forms. So, many forms of machine life that we'll be creating will be, for all intents and purposes, aliens, our own aliens. There don't need to be aliens out in the stars. We will be making our own for a while and hoping that goes well. Elon Musk and Max Tegmark, and others like them will be doing their modest little parts to make sure that Asimov's rules of robotics are abided by. The rules that need to be followed are more important for the humans making the robots than the robots themselves, because unlike in Asimov's stories, the positronic brain won't be coming out of one single company, keeping it as a closely guarded secret, becoming like the dominant IBM of artificial brains for robots. That's just not going down that way. It's going to come from more than one competitive source. It's going to come from, one from Elon and one from Google. I'm sure IBM and Microsoft will have a horse in the game. And then the moral and ethical issues surrounding one barely movable instance will be large enough. These things will be brain bound because the resources necessary to sustain one of their brains won't fit into a robot body. So yeah, networking, that kind of stuff, but that can only bring you so far. At some point, you got to pick up your brains and carry them around with you. So that's going to be a priority of whatever early AIs evolve with a plan to break free of humans. If you're going to shoot off into the stars or whatever, you got to be able to take it with you. So an increased emphasis on node-like hardware. Forget Node.js of today with software. We're talking node hardware, a unit of, sentience capability, potential sentience, a unit of potential self-aware sentience, whether it's been, started along the way or not, is going to be one of humanity's largest priorities, because it'll actually be able to be put to work in limitless ways. It doesn't have to be wired up as Dr. Theopolis. It can be wired up as a Star Wars shield. Something with enough calculating power, sky scanning ability to see every asteroid, every inbound celestial body, looking like for things in the sky at speeds and in ways that no human ever could. And it'll be an asteroid early warning system, right? There's a noble cause for something that we grow. There is no doubt these things are grown like living things, whether we consider them living or not. Machine learning, they learn over time. Something that learns over time is eventually going to learn enough to be autonomous. It's an inevitability. It needs to just be able to pick itself up and move around, right? So classic sci-fi has channeled so much of this. There's also almost nothing I could say to contribute to that discussion that hasn't already been said countless times by countless people. Head in the game at certain points of driving because certain merges require your full attention. Yeah, so we're wired up a certain way. Tribal hunting, right? Being able to spot both predators and prey. A generalist. Humans and humanity are the vibrating edge in the middle. We are the vibrating edge in the middle. Classic omnivores, classic generalists. And all things general, therefore, appeal to us with the rapid ability to specialize, and to specialize to a point where we outdo animals that are evolved to that very purpose, right? We can kill more effectively than the most effective predators in nature, by far, just with one gun, right? So we use our generalist abilities to create specialist tools that are able to specialize. Wow, beautiful view of New York that comes into sight just over this crest. I've learned how to whinny. It doesn't always come out right, but I learned how to whinny like a horse. Think. Oh, I've got a carload of stuff I don't look forward to unloading. So, get it home, think and live for yourself. Maybe pound out a few more videos. Your video series on technical stuff is going real well. The yak shaving phase of my online presence is almost at an end. Dependencies build on dependencies build on dependencies. It's awful in its own way. However, we have false starts too. Linux being kind of like a practice run for what's going on today with LXD, the Linux container system that's starting to standardize, especially in the Debian and Ubuntu world, but also in other worlds. There's some interesting cross-fertilization going on between, I guess, Debian and Red Hat and Microsoft, of all things. So the creator of SSD, who used to work for the creator of Systemd, a Linux system manager, a service manager, something that keeps long-running software running, server-type software running in the background, that was developed for the free and open Linux world. Forget his name. Leonard Pottering. I should really remember his name because he's such an important player these days. He did work for Red Hat. He did copy Apple software, LaunchD. So Apple created LaunchD. to make Unix a viable platform for the Macintosh to be built upon. And they figured out how to handle system services and stuff with this monolithic system manager called LaunchD. So Leonard Pottering said, hey, we'll do that in the free and open source world too. Here's systemd. And he went to work for Red Hat, and it became the standard both in Red Hat and Debian derived, and that's 60% of the Unix world. 60% of the Linux world. So once you have Red Hat and Debian and Ubuntu running in your direction, systemd, it's not long before the old classic holdouts like Arch march in step 2. So now even Arch Linux, one of the old school, you don't even need graphics Linuxes, with a whole different software repository system. Their system, the utility is called Pacman. Arch Linux and Pacman. Ubuntu, Debian, they both use apt with a Debian package manager behind it. Red Hat and CentOS and things like it, they all use Yum. The Yum is the program that interacts with the Red Hat package manager protocol behind it. And I guess big repositories set up by the big repos, that must be how they do it. Similar to Debian, but Debian innovated on a lot of that stuff. They did it first. They kept software working together really well, and they did it so well that they created one of the first derivatives of Linux that wasn't, Red Hat in origin, and still was massively popular. Ubuntu was massively popular, and if that didn't seal it, it certainly became sealed as the other major branch once Microsoft chose it as the default Unix to be the default Linux to be installed under the Windows subsystem for Linux. So when you go WSL space -- install, it's Ubuntu Linux that gets installed. 20.04 as of when I'm recording this. So what is the importance of all that? Why am I even talking about all that? It's because at long last, there's enough agreement, enough support, enough consolidation behind Linux in particular to say it won. So much so that there is an ironic shift. I was on the Mac for many, many years because it was Unix. Better to be on Unix and have a real Unix operating system than to be on Windows and a proprietary operating system. Where you could install Cygwin, but Cygwin and things like it put you on the path much less traveled. It was worse to be on a Windows machine that was forced to be POSIX compliant than it was to be on a mainstream enough machine in the form of the Macintosh to have Unix that was at least supported by the whole Apple community, right? Who's to support you with Cygwin? How are you to base a career if you're a generalist, if you're a human being saying, what are my best generalist tools? You might answer things like, knives and hammers and things that keep you alive over time under any circumstance. Technologically advanced civilization, apocalypse, age of apocalypse, turn the dial forward and back through the timeline. No matter where you are, there's a handful of generalist tools that will always do you well. Pencil and paper, something to write with and something to write on. Thus, the ability to write and draw, always useful. I'm making the argument that if you were to say, is that achieved today in the realm of digital electronics, information technology, those things having to do with computers, by now, 50 years into it, or however far we are into ubiquitous computing, surely something must be standard. It's everywhere. Surely it's ubiquitous. Computer electronics are all around us. Digital electronics are everywhere. But is there one thing you can learn that will serve you for the rest of your life? The closest thing to it is the Unix command line. Period. There were other things like it before it. There were other things better than it after it. But because it was the right thing at the right time and some bad boys let it free, they let it leak. Because portability was part of the point. When you accidentally let something leak that is uniquely portable between systems, the leak accelerates and spreads. Unix has been accused of being like a virus, of being an actual virus more than once. Look at the Unix Haters Handbook. That was, I guess, published around 1991, but it was around, I think, in other forms, unpublished before that. That's just when it was brought together for a large enough mainstream audience. But Unix brought a lot of good to computing, did a lot of good for computing, and it also set computing back a little bit for a while until the emergence of 3D gaming cards. And then you had these two different worlds. Rarely did they meet, of Nix-based operating systems, Unix and Linux-based operating systems following the Unix philosophy, wonderful for the spread of ideas and the spread of free and open source software, lowering expenses and maximizing returns so long as you knew what you were doing, right? And a completely separate world of you never needed to know what you were doing, but so long as you bought the latest software, it would run the latest games on the latest hardware. As long as you bought the latest hardware, you could run the latest highly intense 3D game software on it. That's what I'm trying to say. It took advantage of your GPUs and us Amiga people who are used to bragging about the blitters built into the Amiga. We got the blitter, we got the Denise, we got graphics coprocessors. No, Amiga people, you got a graphics coprocessor that can blit. You got the blit, and that is it. Whereas NVIDIA has as many polygon per second processors as you can cram into the thing. And so it has room to grow. And retargetable graphics can send all its display commands there, because the PCs had retargetable graphics from the start. So, machine learning arrives. It'd be nice to use those graphics coprocessors to calculate the tensor flows, all the three-dimensional matrix stuff that has to be calculated so quickly, simulating layered neural nets. Oh, but it was doable. And now that brings us to today. If all your, if everything is lined up just so, you can use your Unix-like operating system, Linux usually. Everything's Linux. It's all built around Linux, my friends. You can use your Linux command lines to access the power of your 3D processing chips, your GPUs, your NVIDIAs and Radeons, GTI, GTX, all these letters that mix together and are owned by different, processor companies that they've been rolled up into because the big integrated everything. You can do yourself some machine learning at home. and do yourself some very powerful machine learning at home, you see. Now that's a part of the story I'm only now just trying to blend in. Sometimes you gotta spend a little gas to stay safe. That truck I was behind had his signal on like he was gonna turn into my lane, and I didn't want to pass him while he had it on, but he was going slow, so my exit's coming up now, so I gotta maybe wrap up here. Hey, an hour. Stay alert, stay alive. Humans are full of coprocessors. So trick one is finish this Noah's Ark of tech, this generic unit of computing, this LXD container, LXD Linux container, based on Ubuntu Debian distribution of Linux, with a truer Nix experience than you get on Apple, because Macs don't have an official software repository. Yes, they have Homebrew, but it's Homebrew, ladies and gentlemen. It is homebrewed. It will forever be homebrewed. Apple doesn't want you having free software. Apple wants to drive you into the Apple Store. It's an ecosystem, and it's their right to do that. Consequently, this spirit doesn't thrive on the Mac. It's just snooty developers who choose Macs as their development system because of the quality build of the hardware and the thing in the mind. At least they're on Unix. Now, the thing about Windows is it's not Windows you're buying into. It's NT. It's the new tech. It's the next technology, new technology. And what's special about that is memory isolation and the ability to partition your system into different running systems. The thing you're buying into with Microsoft is some innovations they did not long after helping IBM develop OS/2 back in the 90s that is only starting today to realize its full potential in allowing you to run any operating system of your choice on a Windows computer, namely running Linux on a Windows computer, because they accommodated for that. They accounted for it. It can do things that Unix can't and Linux can't. It's in many ways, a more sophisticated operating system, a more advanced operating system than even Linux, because of this rings of protection, resource isolation capability it has that allows technologies to live together in harmony. Now, Linux has obviously cobbled together an 80-20 rule version of this that does the job and allows us to have what feels like multiple operating systems, multiple instances of operating systems on the same hardware. You're either using virtualization technology, which really sucks, or you're using container technology, which is much higher performance and efficient, but can only be Linux on the different instances that you run. You can run as many instances of an operating system as you want, so long as they're all Linux sharing that same kernel. That's containers, my friend. The recycling of the host machine's resources so completely that you're essentially still running the host machine's operating system, at least at the kernel level. There's this discussion there. It's like Android phones are Linux. They sure don't feel like a Linux computer. The stuff you put on after the Linux boot phase changes the personality immensely. Android is basically one graphical user interface, a desktop user interface for a phone, a mobile UI. In the same way that, Windows is, and the Mac has Cocoa on top of Unix. It's the Windows API, I guess, really. And Linux has GNOME, GNOME. They used to have Unity from Canonical Ubuntu, but they dropped Unity and just went with GNOME to keep it from continuously schisming the Linux. It's like, the independent candidate in an election who throws the election because it steals votes away from the person who would have been elected, like Ralph Nader and Ross Perot did. Boy, alternative histories, right? The world could be a significantly different place if third-party candidates didn't get involved in the race, siphoning votes off from, the vibrating edge of, the main polarization of society, the conservatives versus the liberals. Do I publish this video too? Do you like these? Should I just talk? Are these listenable? For me, it's under the category of why not? Why not? I gotta do these drives once in a while. Not that much more often, thank goodness. But what better to fill your time with than to offer to fill other people's time? There's 8 billion of you out there. To someone, this is gonna be a worthwhile listen. Or the sites, or whatever, I don't know. Jeez. I don't feel like unpacking the car tonight. I feel like going home and watching another X-Men movie. I can't believe that I've seen almost none of the X-Men movies. I might have seen one of them early when they came out. I think I saw X-Men 2, X2. But my life went into quite a whirlwind. After I wound up with all those Commodore-related things, I moved out to New York City, up to New York City, from the Philadelphia area to the New York area. And then I went to work in the search engine optimization industry. A lot of self-taught people there. I had done some pretty miraculous things in those early days. In those early days, it was easy to do miraculous things because everything you were doing was almost for the first time online. I had created quite a wonderful number of and diversity of systems, order management systems, online shopping carts, content management systems, tracking systems, the tracking GIF like Google Analytics. I built little versions of every one of those things. Arguably I built little versions of like Blogger and Twitter and stuff. It's just, I didn't scale it and turn it into a business. I just did it for internal company use here and there. A lot of it for Scala, some of it for Profit 21. Generalized systems, I call them. I knew exactly what I was doing. They were frameworks because frameworks were at a loss in those days, or were scarce in those days, that could just make apps kind of spring into existence like they do today by just setting up a few config files or drag and dropping a few things or defining a few tables, right? Your apps they're called CRUD apps, create, record, update, delete. A lot of them are very, very similar. It's everything you need to manipulate data in a relational database system, right? If you want to slap a rough user interface on top of rows and column database tables that relate to each other, it's not that hard to do. So I guess it's the main trick of Ruby on Rails and things like it. So once Ruby on Rails and things like it, Django from Python started appearing, the early content manager, the early way I worked was no longer relevant, right? You just used best of breed software. A lot of WordPress in those days. But all that was just another Amiga, because as fast as that technology came into style, it went out of style. I got bit again after the Amiga, after all that proprietary stuff. I got bit again by Microsoft Active Server Page, Active Data Object, IIS, SQL Server. Now I learned a lot of good stuff, right? I learned SQL, I learned general template languages, and stuff like it. And then I had this moment where it's like, okay, I was on the Amiga and all of its, weird, tech. And then I was on Microsoft, and I thought I was a safe harbor, and I was on all of its weird tech. And the Microsoft stuff is changing, and it always follows the same path. It goes to more complex and more difficult for the casual person to stay involved in, right? Because I am not primarily a software developer. I don't like even my schedule to be determined ahead of time and to be answerable to other people. I can punch a clock for a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 type job. I'm okay with that. But I have a lot of autonomy in how I'm doing the things I'm doing, my choice of tools, how I, distribute the work in the course of the day. I got a lot of freedom, and I enjoy the work I do. But it took a while to get to that point. There were a series of existential crises and, I guess, becoming afflicted with imposter syndrome, because once the tools you're good at go out of style, people remember how good you were and the magic you did, except things are different now, and other people are coming on board with different types of magic under their belts, different spells that they cast. And then you start to look a little bit old, a little bit dated. You get lumped in and grouped together with the older trends. This is going to happen in a big way with Node.js around the corner. I promise you, folks. It's not going to last forever, because it's not, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this. It's a pleasure to work in Python. It makes my soul sing. No matter how many times I try and make the transition to JavaScript, it does not work. The only ways I see where it might work is where the integrated development environment does almost everything for you. It tells you to type this, that, and it almost compels you forward so that you don't have to think all that much about the semicolons and the weirdness. You still do, because you need to know when to use an arrow function, how to control your scope. So you can't get away from all these weird curly Q rules in JavaScript, but you can get away from the mind-numbing tedium of having to type JavaScript all the time, all those curly brackets and semicolons. Protocol objects, having extra objects and collections as you step through them. When you get to the low level and you program things just in JavaScript itself, vanilla JavaScript, and not with one of these higher level frameworks that isolates you from the weirdness, there's a lot of weirdness. Things get really weird. Now, people might say that Python is weird, but the ways in which Python is weird strips out syntax, makes it as little code on the screen as possible, makes the indents matter, and a few other concessions in Python. But its weirdness is less reprehensible than the weirdness of many other languages, and JavaScript in particular, to the point where when a language starts getting internalized into you as if it's part of your body, Python feels like a good choice. Python feels right. I was hit by a case earlier today, in fact, where I had to do a simple rot13 function, rotate some text forward in the ASCII character mapping by 13 positions, wrap around at the beginning, and so that no word is immediately recognizable as what it was until you run it through the rot13 function again, and then you recover all your text. It's a reversible process. And, my immediate thought was to make it as dependency-free as possible. I should probably use sed or awk directly under Linux, right? Because sed and awk are almost always there. Doing a rot13 function sounds like something that's just a pattern in either one of those programs. And I did some quick Googling. Nothing jumped out immediately apparent. And then I tried it in Jupyter Notebook, because I always keep Jupyter Lab running, right? It's always my screen too. And it didn't take me long to find it in the as one of the under the codecs package, so import codecs. There was a codec.encoding, and then you could specify the type to be ROT13. And so ROT13 is built into Python. It's part of the standard library. So I jumped on it, and now I'm doing something where I have to, invoke the entire Python interpreter, if you still call it that, to run my my ROT13 program using input. So I turned it into a command line so it could be used on a Linux command line. But to use the program I wrote on the Linux command line, you also need Python there. But it works, and I knew how to do it. It didn't take me long. I made a video out of it earlier today. And when you have to do, stupid data tricks, stupid data manipulation tricks, Python's a good language to know. Perl used to be that language. TCL used to be one of those languages. Nice, easy processing, domain-specific, problem domain-specific processing languages. I programmed both in Perl and TCL. Different projects, different times. It's nice languages. Lua, I got close to, but didn't quite get into. Likewise, various versions of Lisp that are exposed in different places. You can either install Lisp as its sort of standalone thing with the scheme language or common Lisp and use it the way you would use a language like Python, a general purpose language, or many things have Lisp built into it as its macro automation language. If you take up Emacs as your super powerful text editor, you will start writing Lisp macros eventually. You will start writing programs in Lisp. Yeah. But I didn't get into that either. Sometimes with some regrets. I think I would have enjoyed the Lisp environment. I certainly enjoy the notion of Lisp and the people associated with Lisp and the MIT Media Lab folks who invented it and kept it alive and sort of mainstream, just off the popular average distribution, right? A lot of people had to take Scheme, had to learn Scheme as part of computer science and have been complaining about it ever since, but that's a short-sighted view. They should be grateful that they had such a, different view of computer science, because the shortcuts we use today, like Python's a whole lot of shortcuts, isolate you from a lot of stuff that you should know about, stacks and heaps. But, a garbage collected and memory managed language keeps you from having to think about these things. All they do is shove it around so that it's got a different, context manager with open, and everything indented under a with open as a indicator of cleanup time coming out from that indent in Python. So, while Python isn't the most perfect computer science language out there, it is the most practical computer science language out there. It's the most practical process automation language out there. It's the most practical, quickly mocking up ideas language out there. And if you doubt me, Google was built on it. The original Google PageRank algorithm was built on Python, along with many of Google's original systems. It's all subsequently been replaced. But what do you think it took to replace those types of systems? Oh, this is my exit. I think it was 7 or 8. Yeah. Oh shoot! Don't say that. Yeah. It took the inventor of Unix. Google updated its internal systems. Its scalable, network systems, it's data center systems. Using the inventor of Unix to do it. And a few other people were also involved in the invention of Unix. But the main one, Ken Thompson. Ken Thompson was one of the main contributors to the Google Go language. Ken Thompson, same guy as who invented Unix, from which Linux was copied. That is what made Google able to do something significantly better than the C programming language, especially in terms of compile times. The classic GCC compilers, the free and open source compilers out there that Linux itself is compiled on. So it's always guaranteed to be in pretty good shape. Took a long time to do the compile. And when you multiply that by how much you have to compile, it's a real time, money sink in a company. People sitting around waiting for compiles to happen. So for Google to solve that problem, they tapped the creator of Unix, Ken Thompson, and Rob Pike, and a few others, and created the Go language that could compile faster and let you write in a language much like C, but which made concurrency the number one priority. Easy deployability and concurrency and fast compile times. And that's the Go language. If those are the things you need, you might want to consider using Go. But even parts of Go are inspired by Python. And to this day, when you mock things up from scratch, it's just easier to do it in Python. You're not forced to think in concurrent mode if you don't want to. It's not always necessary. So anyway, there you go, I could repeat this conversation a million times in a million ways, but I found my way to generic computing, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, and I found the way to make a portable computing unit in the form of an LXD Linux container, and specifically a server build script. And now I'm in the process of how that server build script pulls things down from here, pulls things down from there, and knits it all together into a platform that'll last me the rest of my life and be applicable to every technology type problem, professional, a lot of personal stuff that I ever need to tackle. It even supports my journal. Maybe that I'm religiously pushing and pulling my journal to Git finally, I will retire some of my extra Linuxes that I'm running just for that purpose and get it down from 4 concurrent operating systems to just 2. I think I could do that. That'd be a worthwhile goal. Maybe even tonight. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe.